Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to our monthly show. What promises to be quite an interesting one. Today we're going to be learning about Sidonia and Earth-Mars connection. Dr. Bruce Cornet, whom you may or may not have met before. Bruce is his doctorate in geology, and he brings a lot of knowledge of the subject to the issues that are going to be discussed today. Now, a little about just to reiterate the housekeeping rules, like Bruce said earlier, please keep yourselves muted. We will have a question and answer period towards the end of the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat capability. We do monitor it and we will respond to it. There will also be a panel approach periodically. Several people will be asking questions and making comments throughout the show itself. The last half hour is going to be dedicated to questions that you all have in the audience or comments that you would like to make and a conversation you can have with Bruce. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce at this point, and Bruce will cue us through. Yes.
Hi there,
Hello.
and so glad to be here.
Oh, well, who is this? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, welcome. I'm glad you're here too. Anyway, I'm going to start. Bruce, why don't you jump in and start your presentation?
Hello, everyone. This is a project that I've been working on since 1992. And I began or created my first PowerPoint back in 2007. And the PowerPoint has evolved since then. So you're getting the up-to-date, most recent version, the Sidonia Earth-Mars connection. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Okay. You're there, Bruce.
In 1976, pictures of Mars were made from the Viking ship. America's Viking 1 spacecraft has landed on Mars and beamed back to Earth the first photographs of its surface. U.S. President Gerald Ford has proclaimed 20 July Space Exploration Day, as it was on this day 7 years ago that the first man walked on the moon. British astronomer Patrick Moore has described it as one of the most exciting days in the whole of mankind. Next slide. This is a picture of the Viking image that was taken, the first image coming back to Earth. Next slide. This is an image of Mars and the locations of the Cytonia region where the face on Mars is located, along with the Viking 1 and Viking 2 landing sites, and later the Pathfinder landing site. This is obviously not an up-to-date picture with all of the other rovers that have been sent to Mars. Next slide, please. This is the possible configuration of ancient oceans on Mars, coming from 1999, and showing that the Sedona area was right on the edge of the shoreline of this ancient sea. Next slide, please. NASA Mars mission. Landers, Insight, Curiosity, Spirit, and Opportunity, Mars Pathfinder, and Viking. These represent the majority of landers that have gone to and explored Mars. And I give the sequence showing here when they occurred. On the left, lower left, the lower right, the Viking, the Mars Global Surveyor, the Mars Pathfinder in 1996, the Mars Polar Lander in 1999, Mars Exploration Rover in 2004, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter 2005 and 2006, the Phoenix 2008, Mars Science Laboratory 2012, and finally the InSight in 2018. So we are going to be seeing images from many of these rovers in this presentation, and orbiters. Next slide, please. Mars has yielded hundreds of anomalous objects in the various images. Of course, we have been told by NASA that there is no life on Mars, especially intelligent life. So the question begs, why are we finding all of these structured objects, some of which, as in the upper left image, looks like a machine or a tool of some sort. And then on the right, we have a picture of trees, what appears to be trees from above, and in the lower right, picture of what looks like a log. How is this possible? And in the lower left, we have what appears to be a perfectly formed pyramid. These kinds of images go against all common sense that this is nothing but just natural objects and materials on Mars. Next picture, please. More recent Mars anomaly investigations. And I list a number of people who are very actively researching and examining the gigapan images coming from the Mars rovers. Robert Harber, I'm going to be presenting some of his images. His is at the top. He has a site online, YouTube, called Inhabit Mars. Then Neville Thompson has gigapans and gigamacro pages. Neil Spence, Terraform Mars, has a number of websites as well and channels. Keith Langley, Gigamacro, has his own channel and view. And Mars Anomalies and Beyond, Chris Marney, has his YouTube website. And this is in contrast to what we had way back in the 90s and late 80s, when there are different people involved, such as Richard Hoagland and Mark Carlotto and Robert Morningstar and Dr. John Brandenburg in these searching for anomalies on Mars. Next slide, please. Robert Harber has recently established his own Inhabit Mars website and online channel. And you see his image in the upper left, along with his wife and child. And he has been finding some amazing things on Mars. He has a very keen eye, and I'm amazed at what he's been able to see that many other people haven't. And yet a lot of his training has come from others who have found things before him, and he has elaborated on them with his CGI attempt to reconstruct these objects so that we can understand what he sees. Next slide, please. Question is this the outline of a very large ship resting between two ridges inside Gale crater, which appears to have been a lake in the distant past? And certainly, if there are shipwrecks in the bottom of this lake, and that you can see here now that the water has gone, that would imply that there was intelligent life on Mars. But even more spectacular, when Robert focused in on this particular object, this looks like a huge ship, possibly the size of Noah's Ark. And Neville Thompson, who originally discovered it or recognized it, shown, his picture is shown on the lower right. I present two arrows showing the bow on the right and the stern on the left. And there definitely does seem to be some unusual structures there that cannot be explained as natural. Next slide, please. Gale Crater Lake. You see the red arrow here showing the position of Gale Crater. right on the edge of an ancient sea in blue. And in the middle of the picture, you see the word Cytonia. That's where the face occurs and how close it is to Gale Crater. Gale Crater Shipyard. Is this a sunken or stranded wooden ship outline? And this is something that just goes completely against our story about what we're going to find on Mars. Robert thought, based on looking at close-up images of the structure, that it looked like it had the grain of wood in it. Now, here's the problem. Wood on Mars, where did this wood come from? Where are the trees? If this is a wooden ship, why is it still existing if all of the seas, according to NASA, existed, billions of years ago? Doesn't make sense. So why is something there on Mars in Gale Crater that resembles a ship? And Robert has also modeled some what appeared to be tubes and that coming out of the ground, representing things that may have once been part of the ship. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Here's the stern of this wooden ship, question mark. Was Gale Crater an inhabited lake before an atomic explosion? What do you mean, atomic explosion? What evidence do we have for that? Coming from Dr. John Brandenburg. Here you can look at the back of the ship, and it definitely has what appears to be a structured makeup similar to that of what we'd expect for some sort of a boat. Next slide, please.
Bruce, I have one quick question.
Sure.
Just to clarify, for clarification purposes, these objects that are portrayed here, these are CGI, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that
up.
Yeah,
what Robert wanted to do is make them more understandable, other than just impressions or ridges and elongations on the Martian surface. And so he copied them very carefully and then rendered them with CGI in order to resemble the pictures that you saw. Okay, this next slide is the face on Mars. And if you look at this overall, it's a composite of the Sidonia Complex, as it has been called by Richard Hoagland, spreading from the left to the right, upper right. And in the center of the image, the center line at the top, there's a little image of the face that you can see. Next slide, please. Here we have the face in enlargement. And back during the low resolution days of the Mars orbiter, we could not really get a detailed resolution on the face. And in this condition, it looks a lot like a face. And people have claimed to have seen eye sockets, nose, forehead, mouth, and even teeth in the mouth. But this is not what the higher resolution images eventually showed. Next slide, please. There have been numerous publications documented for the face controversy. And here are a number of publications that were published between 1950 and 1999. Now, the image of the book cover is actually a comic book cover on the upper left was done in the 1980s, talking about finding a face on Mars. This was before any space exploration or any knowledge of an actual face-like structure on Mars, which is highly unusual. Then we have books by Richard C. Hoagland and Stanley McDaniels, Mark Carlotto, and also John Brandenburg. Next slide, please. Additional publications by Brandenburg are shown at the bottom, from the Dead Mars, Dying Earth to Death on Mars, along with some of the previous ones I just showed on the previous slide. And John Brandenburg is noted for his theory of atomic explosions on Mars, which is hard to to believe, but the evidence seems to be very compelling. Next slide, please. The Sidonia Complex. This is what Richard Hoagland, a diagram of relationships observed in Sidonia by Hoagland, Torn, and others. This simplified graphic representation is intended for illustration purposes only. Any attempt to verify the claimed values should be based upon larger scale orthographically rectified reproductions. You'll notice a number of different images in this picture. On the upper right, you have what appears to be a crater. Next to it, to its left, there appears to be a ridge built up on top of the outsplash apron of the crater. One thing that very few people talk about is that these impact structures in this region where there had been an ocean, there had to have been considerable amount of water in the underlying sediment for this outsplash to have occurred. It would not have occurred if those sediments were dry. If you move down to the lower right, you'll see a round structure where all the lines come together, and that is called the tholus. It is breast shape, which gives its name, and just above it, there's a satellite mound that I will show you also is part of the complex. If you go to the upper left, you have a number of objects that appear to be pyramid in shape. That's around a city square, as Hoagland calls it. And these pyramids are called the city pyramids by Hoagland. And some of them definitely look like pyramids, but they are odd shapes. Then if you go to the lower left, you see the D&M pyramid based on the discovery by Di Pietro and Molinard of this very unusual five-sided pyramid that has a footprint of over 3 square miles. It's that large and appears to rise more than 1,000 feet in elevation. And in the center, underneath the word relationship, you can see the face clearly indicated in that position. And what Hoagland and others discovered was that there appeared to be mathematical and geometric relationships between these different features, suggesting that they were created by intelligent design. Next slide, please. This is a picture generated by Mark Carlotto, a computer expert, and he shows what it looks like based on CGI back in 1994-95. And in this image, you can see the face in the upper right. You can see the D&M pyramid in the lower right and how tall it is. You can see to the left the city of pyramids with 4 dots near the center representing what Hoagland calls the city square. And the one pyramid in the center top of that cluster is 6-sided and very unusual. I'll be talking about that more later. Next slide. This is a rendition of what the face would look like viewed from the city and to the south. And what is important is that they show it's surrounded by water, implying that it may have existed when there was an ocean on Mars. We don't know if the pyramid, the face existed when there was an ocean. But one ironic aspect of this is I have discovered a duplicate of the Sidonia Complex here on Earth in the Walker River Valley of New York State. And at the time, in the 1800s, when the settlers came in, they found that the face on Earth was surrounded by a lake, much like you could imagine as the lake of the sea surrounding the face on Mars. Next picture. Here is a very high resolution image of the D&M pyramid. This is highly significant because in the past, with only the poor resolution images, people could not see that there was damage on the right side, that the crater had collapsed to such a degree as you see in this image, forming a slump and a ridge around the feature that represents the toe of the slump, the energy that was generated when that side of the pyramid collapsed. There's also material underneath the pyramid that has been squeezed out on the left side, and I'll show a close-up and diagram that better. But it's quite clear that this feature is artificial because it demonstrates mass failure and mass wasting, as we call it here on Earth. And if this had been a bedrock structure that had resisted erosion for millions of years, why would it suddenly collapse like this? Next slide, please. This is an overlay of a perfect pentagonal pyramid on the DNM, and you can see a number of arrows showing the direction of the collapse and how that right arm slid down and away from the pyramid. And you can see the toe of the slump being labeled and outlined that spreads outward. Next slide, please. Here again, it's the same image, but showing a cross-section of it and how the slump occurred and how the weight of the pyramid appears to have loaded the sediments underneath, which obviously contain water based on the outsplash aprons of the surrounding craters. And this material was liquefied and squeezed out on the left side and caused the collapse with internal faulting on the right side. Next slide, please. The enormous weight of the pyramid, even on Mars, caused sediment on the west side to be squeezed like toothpaste out of the underlying pyramid, forming arcuate ripple ridges in green, missed by NASA scientists to prevent Hoagland from getting credit for its artificial origin. Hanlon, in his book, The Real Mars, even claims this high-resolution image proves it is not artificial. I mean, it amazes me how poorly observant the scientists at NASA were, and not bringing in Earth geologists to be able to document the problems with that interpretation. Next slide. Mars is characterized by many features that resemble faces and figures, humanoid figures. The human mind is programmed or wired to see faces. The term is called pareidolia, a psychological phenomena involving a vague and random stimulus being mistakenly perceived as recognizable, and can also lead people to interpret random images or patterns of light and shade as being faces. And the reason why I included the barking dog was that this image here reminds me of the cartoon character Pluto. Next slide, please. Face-like features abound on Mars. And thanks to Dr. Tom Van Flandern, who passed away many years ago, in 2002, he gave a presentation showing some of the most unusual face-like features that he's found or has been discovered on Mars. And here we can see what clearly appears to be a face of a human with a crown or a hat on. And is this natural? This is quite disturbing if it's natural. Is this something that can normally occur on Mars? Well, some people will say, well, maybe Mars is unusual that way, that features that resemble, humanoid faces do occur on this planet. But there's the other possibility that this may have been artificially carved. Next slide, please. Here's two images, one enhanced and outlined on the right, showing what appears to be a woman based on the long hair and breasts and a hat or crown. Why does such an image occur on Mars? What is its implication if it was intentionally created? We have similar kinds of images created on the Earth here. The Great Plains Guardian up in Canada, in central Canada, is of an ancient Indian with headdress carved into the Badlands of Canada. So we seem to have something similar going on here in Mars. Next slide, please. Here's a face of a rather fat man with large earlobes. What is that? Is this a correct interpretation of that left image? I'm not sure, but it's just one more example of pareidolia. Next slide, please. And finally, there is this image of what appears to be a child with a large hairdo on it. And you can barely make it out in the left image, and the outline on the right gives you an idea of what somebody thought they saw. Next slide, please. Geologic anomalies on Mars. This is rather amazing because we don't find things quite like this here on Earth, especially in this kind of number and layout. On the left, we have these conical structures all pointing in the same direction. They're not sand dunes. Look at the shadows. Objects are at an angle from the surface. What in the world would cause that? On the upper right, we have what appear to be triangles, and they're just clustered there. What could cause that? And on the lower right, we have fracture patterns that are more than likely geological in nature, but some people have attempted to interpret those as the walls of an ancient Martian city. Next slide, please. You have to do 2 clicks, Joe, to get the face to come up. And this is the low resolution and high resolution face images superimposed, so you can see as resolution increase with new camera pictures, the face looks less and less like that of an actual face. And I'll go to the next slide so you can see what the true image looks like in high resolution. Next slide. High resolution images of the face show that it is damaged, that the right and lower right sides of this feature have collapsed. This is quite large object. It is more than 1.5 miles long, and it has a distinctive platform around it, forming it's almost like an outline. It is an outline around an internal face with where you can see 2 eye sockets, a nose, maybe even nostrils, perhaps, a mouth, and possibly even an indication of maybe a tooth or 2 in the mouth, and a chin. On the right side, you see the collapse feature, which is much more clearly evident. And now that we know that the DNM pyramid has collapsed, we can probably surmise that whatever was causing these collapses also affected the face. And I will suggest, as I'll show you, that maybe these atomic explosions that John Brandenburg talks about, based on the high concentrations of xenon-129 isotope, may have shaken the ground so much that they caused this type of collapse. Next picture, please. Here's a close-up of the lower part of the face, and you can clearly see that these features have slumped in this area. But you can also see that the rest of the face looks very unnatural. In other words, and Mark Collado had an algorithm that in NASA they provided to analyze the data for patterns that were artificial and patterns that were natural. And the face turned out to be very bright on his resulting analysis, meaning that it was artificial. Next slide, please. Imperfect symmetry is not evidence against artificiality. And that unfortunately was used by people in NASA to claim that the face is nothing but a pile of rocks. It is not evidence if it is hiding multiple figures. And this is something that Robert Morningstar discovered in 1994. And I'll show you what he discovered and how he discovered it. And it brings to mind scripture in Ezekiel 10, verse 12. As for the wheels, they were called in my hearing wheels. And as you recall, Ezekiel talked about seeing wheels inside wheels rotating in the sky above him. Verse 13, each one had 4 faces. The first face was the face of a cherub. The second face, the face of a man. The third face of a lion. And the fourth face of an eagle. Now this is interesting because this type of verse, this verse occurs in several different places of the Bible. So it was clearly important to the writers of the scripture. Why? What purpose? Now go to the next slide, please. One can turn the face on Mars into 4 different faces by segmenting the face into 4 quadrants with a line going vertical down the center, a line going from left to right in the middle, and then reversing the 2 quadrants at the top to the left, and produces one face. If you instead reverse the 2 quadrants on the bottom, it gives you a different face. And if you reverse the 2 quadrants on the right, it gives you a third face. And if you reverse the 2 quadrants on the left, it gives you a fourth face. Here we can see 2 of these 4 faces. The one on the left looks most like that of a man. The one on the right, we don't know what this represents. It's really bizarre with this, the shapes of the outline. And I suggest that it might have represented the cherub. Next slide, please. And here we have 2 more faces. The one on the left seems to have a beak and may have been intended to be the eagle, whereas the one on the right resembles that of a lion. Now, Robert did a little bit of manipulation of the image on the right to bring out that lion face. But it's important to realize that, when you have a man and a lion and possibly even an eagle, that these faces may be referring to something in Scripture, which would be very interesting because that would connect Earth with Mars. Next slide, please. The discovery of similar features as the Sidonia Complex on Earth in 1992 to 1994 by Richard Hoagland. He found in Great Britain, he discovered what he calls the Sidonia 2. And during that same period of time, discovered another Sidonia 2 in New York. And this is quite amazing because who would ever have expected these features to have such significance that they would have been reproduced on Earth. Hoagland compared Silbury Hill and Avebury Circle in the UK with the Tholos and crater in the Cytonia on Mars, saying that they represent a smaller version of those features. Implication: crop circle formations in Neolithic times became locations and templates for the design of Avebury and Silbury Hill. Temporal concentration of crop circles and UFO sightings in the Wiltshire area of UK drew attention to Neolithic structures and a link to Cytonia on Mars. This is why Hoagland felt that he had found a perfect replica of the crater, the hill, and the Solus here on Earth. And here's his Sidonia 2 in England, showing its significant reduction of size, but also he shows the image of or outline of the D&M pyramid where it would lie if it had existed here on Earth also. Apparently, that pyramid was just too large to be reproduced here on Earth. Next slide, please. Taking a look at the Sidonia Complex on Mars with the crater in the upper right with its hill on the left and the Tholus in the lower part of the image, connecting them by lines, you get an angle of 19.47 degrees. This, if you go on to Richard Hoagland's website pages, you'll find him making significance of this as being latitudinal lines within a sphere where tetrahedra inside the sphere will touch the sides of the sphere, meaning that this is significant planetary geometry that requires intelligent design. And that was largely what Hoagland was trying to convince the public of, that this was not any accident. And the significance is because if you go to the next slide, you can see that there is a tetrahedron built up on top of the rim of this crater on Mars. And to the left, there is a hill constructed with a line ridge running down the center on top of the outsplash apron. That outsplash apron came first, and then the hill had to have been built on top of it. Superposition, which is in geology, is a way of determining which came first and which came second, etc. These are clearly artificial in nature. Next slide, please. Naturally occurring sand periods are not three-dimensional, but are three-dimensional and not four-sided. So that is another aspect of this that indicates that it's not natural. Next slide, please. Here's a good image of Silbury Hill in the distance and Avebury Circle showing their proximity. And also the label and arrow showing where what appears to be the remnants of a tetrahedron on the rim of Avebury Circle. Now, is that just coincidence? Next slide, please. This is the Tholus on Mars. It even has what appears to be a spiral ridge or pathway running down the side of it. And you see the satellite mound off to the left. These are important features because I will show that they are matched on Earth by both the Tholus and satellite mound in New York State. Next slide, please. Silbury Hill looks like a cone, looks like a breast, and it's very similar in shape to the one on Mars. Next slide, please. Jim Javik created this map of the Martian landscape in 1994. And it's been very useful to me in being able to compare what occurred on Mars and what I've discovered on Earth. As you can see in yellow, you can see the various Cytonia features laid out with the crater on the upper right, the Tholus below it, the D&M pyramid, the City of Pyramids, and the face. And you can look at the scale at the bottom, so we can get an idea of the size of these features. Next slide, please. John Brandenburg proposed that there were two massive atomic explosions in the atmosphere just to the north of Cydonia and to the northeast of Cydonia, based on radioactive isotopes, mostly xenon-129. And here he shows where those explosions appear to have occurred based on the concentration of these radioactive isotopes, which could only be produced through nuclear fission, and showing how close they are to Sedona. So an explosion very near Sedona could have shaken the ground significantly enough to cause the collapse of those features in the face and the D&M pyramid. Next slide, please.
Bruce, before we move on here, let me take a break and see if you have any comments or questions from several of the folks that are on the panel. Going right down, I see Nick, I think you have a question, right?
Yes, Bruce, if I may. What are the radiation readings on Mars, especially in this area? Do you know what that data would be?
I think, no, I do not have the specific data. You would have to access Brandenburg's papers.
Okay.
Okay.
I know that radiation goes on for so many thousands of years. And so these, of course, what you're showing certainly seems to be built thousands and thousands of years, if not, I mean, millions perhaps. But I'm just wondering if there's traces of radiation in that area. Okay, that was I just want to quickly ask that question. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Nick. Bruce Pearson, do you have anything that you'd like to add or question or comment, whatever?
I just like to take a step back and take a broad view. It's pretty hard for me in my limited mental capability of believing that all of this documentation and all of these facts are truly circumstantial and coincidental. That it seems to me, if you step back and say, do you really think this is just a coincidence that these things add up this way? Whether there's a perceptive element to it or not, I always let the viewer and the listener decide for themselves. But, you know, I'm thinking about writing a book, as I shared with you, Joe, called "You Can't Make This Stuff Up." And truly, it's phenomenal. And I want to thank Bruce for, as well as all the other authors and researchers, for the amount of work that's gone into the analysis of this. I've listened to Richard C. Hoagland for years. So I respect his work also. And he kind of put this to the forefront, if you will, as far as the general mainstream press. But I don't know. Okay. So how would one explain this otherwise? To me, it's a fascinating theory. It really is. And I'm just blown away by the presentation. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce. Also, I see Peter Robbins is out there, and Peter is a very weighty fellow when it comes to science, technology, and UFOs. Peter, do you have any comments or questions that you might like to ask of Bruce right now? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Bruce Pearson, I think you might have to try to. There we go. Okay, now we hear you, Peter.
Bruce, thanks so much for a terrific presentation. I had the privileged pleasure experience of meeting Richard in the early 90s when he was really just becoming involved in this. I heard at least two of his presentations at the United Nations. And I remember making dinner for him when his first book came out. He came over to my sister's and my apartment. I think, number one, whatever else you can say about his work, and I disagree with him like I do on many people about many things, but this was groundbreaking. And it ignited the imaginations of so many of us who are involved in, UFO related studies, but at the same time are not into science fiction. And for me, to see it laid out like this again and underscored by an area that even a lot of our colleagues will dismiss without looking into it, because to one degree or another, we're all caught up in accepting or rejecting that universal mantra on the old X-Files poster, I want to believe. We all want to believe some of this stuff. We all don't want to believe some of this stuff. But the photos that you showed of some of the authentic anomalies on the surface, I could look at those all day. And They excite me, they frustrate me. They're perfect examples of the kind of things that I'm trying to dedicate this turn in my career of being a weekly radio host and finding issues and subjects that can bring us together. Because certainly in this country, we haven't been more fractured for 150 years. And as we've all seen this week, it's scary. And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I hope that you keep widening your audience for this presentation. And, you know, we exchanged some correspondence just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, whenever, Bruce. Once I kind of get into the groove, I certainly want you to be a guest on the show. But once again, for me, we have to find ways to break into wider audiences. Most of us, you know, we're known in our little community, and it is a little community compared to the greater population of the world that's not into this. But I think part of our challenge going into the future is to find ways to reach out to folks who are not touched by this information, who don't look at it, who don't examine it, who dismiss it with my favorite debunker's mantra: it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. And this ain't something else. This is what it is. I also wanted to say, and I'll shut up, when the first images, the very first images of the face on Mars were released, and thinking about its size and scale and how it would look from the city, and I'm assuming it was, you know, subject to erosion, you know, over the millennia. The nose was probably more prominent and all that. I found it to be one of the most exciting moments in my intellectual life. And then, you know, in the next generation, when we first started to see the digitally enhanced images, which were not as clear or sharp or simply delineated, I remember feeling crestfallen. It's like, oh no, and immediately wanting to believe that the forces that be, you know, had somehow mucked about with it to back us off the trail of the legitimacy of this as a truly anomalous artifact. But, you know, just seeing your projections of it and seeing, yes, this is a symmetrical, face-like structure. You know, we can only make our best guesses. Is it worn down 50,000, 200,000, 350,000 years? But that kind of symmetry in nature. And even as a kid, remembering, you know, finding faces in nature. Once again, I congratulate you, because if I'm any representation, you have just brought this all back to the fore again and made me want to visit these sites, see more of your work, study more of this imagery, and bring it to the attention of more people. So again, thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter.
Thank you, Peter. And
there
you
is-
haven't seen nothing yet.
There is one other person. I believe Lori Cardia is on. Lori, are you there? Or are you muted?
Probably.
Okay, going once, Lori, going twice.
Joe, I'd like to enter a question that Susan Rogers posed, if I may, off the chat.
Sure.
While we're waiting for Lori.
Yeah.
Susan says, what do you think the significance of the pentagonal shape of the pyramid offers us? What's your...
Okay. All right. May I answer? There's something
go
very
ahead.
significant, all right, about the five shaped design, the geometry of it, okay? I mean, we know that, for example, Cairo was named after the planet Mars, and that there have been many ancient peoples who have, you know, looked at and observed and worshipped that planet and thought about what was on Mars. Many had thought it might be a god at one time. And the importance is that we have a lot of information in our own ancestry that connects us to Mars. So it's been in our psyche for thousands and thousands of years. And I'm now beginning to wonder whether or not there's a lot bigger history to our ancestry before 10,000 years. And I'm going to be showing that and giving some insight into what has actually been covered up, and in order to lead humans to believe that our history began with the Sumer civilization in the Middle East about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, and that's it. There's nothing before then except hunters and gatherers, which couldn't be further from the truth based on what I'm going to be showing you. So thank you for those questions.
Okay, Bruce, why don't you go on? We'll resume the slide deck. Should I
Okay.
go to the next slide?
No, hold on with the last one. I wanted to make a couple statements about John Brandenburg's concept or interpretation of nuclear explosions. One of the things I do remember from reading his paper is that he wanted to push those explosions way back in time. Initially maybe billions of years, then only millions of years. But the problem is that Xenon 129, I believe, has a half-life of only about 1 million years. And so that means that it couldn't be much more than 1 million years and in age for these explosions. And one of the things that a friend pointed out is that astronomers back in the 40s, observing the planet Mars, observed 2 brilliant flashes on that planet, only in the 1940s. So, obviously, those flashes were caused by something and unnatural. And one is tempted to speculate that maybe that's when these explosions occurred, because Xenon 129 only has a very short half-life compared to most other radioactive elements. So let's move on to the next slide, please. And here again, we see the direction of the winds according to Brandenburg and how they would have influenced the Sidonia Complex on Mars, and showing the location where the Opportunity and Curiosity were doing their investigations. Next slide, please. One of the most amazing things that I discovered back in the early 90s was discovery that we may actually have the original complex of monuments having been built here on Earth. And they are older than the last ice age. And I'll be getting into this. I show that the images of the features in yellow on this map and how they are distributed within the Wallkill River Valley, which is bordered by the Schwangdunk Mountains on one side and another series of mountains on the southeast side. Now, why is this important? Why was this valley chosen? I'm going to get into that. Next slide. A duplicate of Cytonia and the face here on Earth. Next slide. How could this have been found if the face on Mars is just a pile of rocks? And I'm going to present a very strong case that the Cytonia Complex on Mars is a duplicate created there when after the ice sheets moved down the valley from the northeast to the southwest and destroyed most of the monuments here on Earth. So whatever the reason for the building the complex on Mars, I think it was because they were extremely significant to a form of humanoid life on Earth, whether they be human or extraterrestrial, a long time ago before the last ice age. Now, the last ice age, only the ice reached extended through this valley only during the last maybe 50 or 60,000 years. So these monuments had to have been built during the previous interglacial called the Sangomonian or Eemian in Europe. And that means that during the last interglacial, a warm period, similar to the Holocene in which we are living today, there may have been a rise of global civilizations, which has long since been erased by erosion. Next slide, please. And here gives you the Wisconsin Ice Age and showing the ages at the bottom. I also present two age ranges for the last interglacial of 21,600 years and 108,000 years for the last ice age. And interestingly enough, these figures are very important in ancient geometry and numerology and symbolism for the Egyptians, the Sumerians, for the Babylonians, for even the Vikings and Icelandians. And they're even given a name called the Osiris numbers of 21,600 and 108,000. And then we can see the 11,000 on the right, representing ever since the last ice age ended, with the warmer Dryas, the second Dryas interval at the very end. So notice that the temperature peak on the last interglacial, the Sangomonian, rises much, much higher than our peak from the same relative period within our interglacial. I mean, they have determined, based on isotopes in the ice cores, that the global temperature on Earth rose 3 to 5 degrees centigrade higher than it is today over a period of 3,000 years. Wait a minute. Higher than today over 3,000 years, and we have already been passing through a period where we were getting higher global temperatures. Is that what's happening today? Are we experiencing just a normal flux in temperature, and that's related to how the Earth's orbit is aligned with the sun's ecliptic? It's within less than an eighth of a degree off of perfect alignment, which means that the Earth is getting the maximum solar insolation that it could during that in that orientation, and may explain why the sun is heating up the Earth much faster than we would like to. And of course, we're only contributing to that temperature rise with our pollution. Next slide, please.
Bruce, which slide should I be looking at right now?
Maximum extent of ice during the ice age. It's after the one with the diagram of the Wisconsin.
You were at it, Joe. Go back. Go back. Right there. Hold
that
there.
one. Okay. All right.
Good. Back on track. This is just a reference diagram showing the extent of ice during the maximum ice part of the last ice age and how far it extends down into the United States. And I present this largely to show evidence for why this set of monuments on Earth was badly destroyed by 1 to 2 miles of ice moving slowly over it. As you can imagine, any pyramid sticking up blocks would have been knocked down and carried for miles and miles with the ice down flow. Next slide, please. This shows the retreat of the last ice sheet, the continental ice sheet, from 14,000 years down to the present. Next slide, please. And this is a diagram of end moraines. In other words, where the ice ended, there was like a conveyor belt of rocks that were being carried by the ice. As the ice moved down, it would melt and drop its load of rocks that it had picked up along the way. And these green bands represent end moraines, and the blue ones even further down represent end moraines for the previous Illinoisan Ice Age. Quite amazing. If you then go to the next slide, glacial moraines extend below New York into New Jersey, northern New Jersey. And you can see they go all the way down to Long Island, and actually are partly responsible for Long Island and Cape Cod. And the red arrow in the upper left shows the position and direction of the Walker River Valley River as it flows north into the Hudson River. Next slide, please. This is just a diagram of how the moraine is carried by the ice as it comes down, and also how kettles form in the ice. And when the ice retreats, those kettles become lakes. And you can see in the diagram on the right, labeled the end moraine, it's where all of the rocks got piled up for a while the ice just sat there and like a conveyor belt moved all of its baggage down to the end of the ice sheet. Next slide, please. This is an example of Lake Osiris in Orange County, New York. Why do I show the picture of this lake, which is just north of Walden, which is within the range of all of these monuments in the valley, over 200 square miles? Why did they name it Osiris? Lake Osiris. Why? I mean, that's an Egyptian god. Where did that come from? The people who named it, what were they thinking? Next slide, please. Here shows the Lake Osiris kettle, and there was even a Lake Osiris colony that developed around it. What's going on here? Is this an extraterrestrial colony on Earth? Next slide, please. Here's a picture of the East Coast in infrared, the UFO corridor in pinkish square rectangles, and the brighter the area in the center near where the Pine Bush and Montgomery labels point is where I did most of my research during the 1990s. And we'll go to the next slide. Jacques Vallée published this diagram of different times, 362 cases, 379 cases, up to 1970, 100 cases from Spain and Portugal, showing that there is a peak of UAP activity between 7 p.m. and midnight in all of these areas. And I plotted in black and D the 70 cases for 1992 and 93 that I documented. And you can see that they fall in the exact same pattern. Next slide, please. When I first went out there into the Walker River Valley, I was following Dr. Ellen Crystal around, who took me to all of her localities where she had seen these craft flying around. And they weren't shy at all. They would come out and follow her in her car and put on performances before her. And when I got involved, I was taking time exposures and video of these same kinds of performances. In 1992 and 93, I documented all of these time exposures and then made drawings of their movement and superimposed them over a daytime photograph of the area where they were arising to show you how concentrated they are. And why are they concentrated there? Lo and behold, you go to the next slide, please. You can see that they are coming up out of one specific area. And it wasn't until we flew over that area in a helicopter in 1994 that I discovered why that area is so important. Next slide, please. In that area, in the right picture, you can see an oval mound that has a vague hexagonal shape to it, rising about 8 feet above the field, the farm field to its north, and just to the north of that, another permanent crop circle. And that was just totally blew my mind. And where we were observing all of this activity was from the road at the very top of that image and looking east. And the enlargements on the left give you pictures of these. Turned out to be remnants of an ancient sweat lodge by the native Indians, the Lenape Indians that lived in the valley a long time ago. And the question is, why would they have built a sweat lodge with a fire pyramid or mound on it in that particular location if those lights that were coming out of the ground and which we were photographing weren't occurring back then as well? And it's during my 11-year research that I was able to determine that there's an underground alien base in this valley, right underneath this area. And that's why all of these craft are exiting and entering the ground, literally passing through the trees, passing into the ground. And they're doing these supernatural things that to us seem supernatural at this time because of our ignorance. Next slide, please. One time I was photographing a brilliant plasma lights, and all of these craft use plasma lights, not lamps. They don't have any lamps at all. They generate their lights by ionizing the gases of our atmosphere to produce the various colored lights. And this particular craft was traveling from left to right over that mound, and I took this long time exposure, which was approximately, let's see, that would be 16 seconds time exposure. And suddenly there was this flash as my camera shutter was open, and I didn't know what had happened until I got the picture developed. And there, underneath this light, was a light, golden light splaying out of the ground, coming out of the ground, illuminating a golden pyramid. And then one has to ask, pyramid? What does that signify? Lake Osiris? That's Egyptian. Why are these symbols here in the valley? It's a good question. Next slide, please. Oh, yes. Can't forget. Pyramid means fire in the middle, right? And that's exactly what you see in this image. Light or fire coming up through the middle of the pyramid. You can't get more definitive about the symbolism of this image that they intentionally created while I had my camera shutter open. Next slide. When I started my work in the Waco River Valley in 1992, I was able to borrow a proton magnetometer, and I did a 24 square mile magnetic survey. It took me 3 years to complete. And this is the result of that. And what it shows is a number of magnetic anomalies running up the center of the valley. You have Pine Bush in the upper left, you have Walden on the right, you have Montgomery down to the bottom. And these anomalies are reflections of granitic intrusions in the underlying bedrock that have magnetic iron in them. This is very significant because these are significantly large intrusions. I'll show you a couple of them that have been exhumed in the southern part of this valley to form pyramids. Next slide, please. When I plotted all of the sightings of the craft that I had recorded across this valley, they all fell on top of these underground anomalies. Why? What type of relationship does that represent? One can speculate a lot about this. Also, it is possible that these beings have carved out or have underground chambers within these granitic masses. There's also the possibility that they are mining them for rare earth metals and elements. Next slide, please. When I first started my survey of the area as a geologist, I was actually employed mapping the area in New Jersey for the Newark Basin at the time. So I had quite a bit of experience in this. And this map shows all of the stations I did with the proton magnetometer following all of the different roads and then doing treks across the different farm fields and in the middle of it to be able to generate the magnetic map that you just saw. Now, you may not see this because your eyes are not trained to see it, but in the center of this image, all the creeks and contours tend to outline a circular area. I quickly discovered this. Next slide, please. And I show the circle superimposed. And now that you can see or have the center blocked out, you can see how the contours wrap around it. And this is highly unusual because the grain of the valley is north-south, not circular. Even one of the creeks that drains into the Wallkill River, it takes a curve around it. And I began realizing that there was something there. I thought initially it was a possible impact crater, an ancient impact crater. Now, of significance to the north in the Catskills, recently, somewhere in the late 90s, another crater was found, and this was very well documented in the geological literature. It became newsworthy because it represented the impact that caused a mass extinction at the end of the Ordovician period. And that's significant because the rocks underlying the valley here are all right off the surface are Ordovician in age. Next slide, please. When you map the feature, as I did in 1992, you can see the circular nature and how the contours curve around it. Then I had a suspicion, because Richard Hoagland was at the time describing his Sidonia 2 in Great Britain, where you have all of this UAP and crop circle activity. I wondered maybe I have a reason for all the sightings of UAP in and around Pine Bush here in the Wallkill River Valley as representing something similar. So I called him up and said, how wide was the crater in Sidonia? And he said 2.3 miles. Well, I already measured this crater here on Earth, and guess what? It was 2.3 miles in width. So I took the image from Mars and I overlaid it on that circle. And you can see how all of the contours, and based on the arrows, point out coincidence of this crater feature with the underlying geologic features on Earth. That doesn't seem possible. You know, if it was just natural, it's more than just coincidence. But what even shocked me more, I asked Hoagland, well, what is the center of the crater on Mars? And he said, 41 degrees. You have to check my geologist, or Javik, who did that map. And when I did, it turned out to be 41 degrees, 36 minutes. Now, look at the center of this crater. Its latitude is 41 degrees, 36 minutes. Oh my God. And even more outrageous, there is an X carved at the center of the crater on Mars. I don't think any NASA employee would have put that on the photograph. What is an X marking the spot at the center of the crater? It was to draw our attention to it, and it drew my attention to it. Next slide, please. Here we get a close-up of that X on Mars and the 41 degrees, 36 minutes. And even the collapsed wall to the south seems to be where a swamp is today, as if the two were made to look like one another. And unfortunately, the glacial ice came down and removed most of the crater that may have existed in this location, which is why they built a replica, a template for this on Mars. Next slide, please. If you look to the south, even more outstanding was that there is a road called Hill Avenue that runs along a ridge going from west to east, shown by the white arrow. And lo and behold, the hill on Mars on the outsplash apron falls right along it. What is going on here? Next slide, please. At that particular point, I got very excited, and I said, well, if we have the crater and the cliff, maybe we might also have the tholus. Well, why would I think that? Because the Silbury Hill and Avebury Circle exist in as a pair in the UK, in Wiltshire. All right. So I superimposed the tholus and its satellite mound from Mars on the features on Earth. I had looked at the proportionally to find where the tholus would exist if it was a 1-to-1 ratio, and I found the tholus underlying the Stewart Army and Air Force Base near Newburgh, New York. Whoa. And you can see, even though erosion has damaged the feature on Earth, you can still see the similarities, the center of it and the satellite mound, the same size, orientation, and distance from the tholus on Earth as it is on Mars. And what is even more ironic, and just like all of the pareidolia images of faces on Mars, why would anyone want to call this a little town just to the south of the satellite mound in New Windsor, Little Britain? Oh, come on now. This is getting too ridiculous. All right, let's move on to the next slide. I thought, okay, let's find the face. If I'm this lucky, I might as well, shoot for the moon on this one, pun intended. And I looked at the topographic maps, spread them out after I plotted the position of the crater and the tholus on those topographic maps. I looked in the same direction and same distance from the crater and tholus, triangulating with using them. And where I ended up was at a mound just west of Goshen, New York. And as you can see, when I superimposed the face on Mars on the one features on Earth, but reversed it as a reverse image, a mirror image, it matches almost perfectly. The border around the face is missing, but you can still see the forehead in darker, and then the nose ridge and the mouth and the chin below it. And you can see the eye sockets, where the eye sockets would be. Very similar. And this gave me a lot of confidence that I was dealing with something very amazing here, and would indicate that the features here on Earth preceded the ones on Mars in age. Now, we'll go to the next slide, please. When you magnify this and take a look at it, there is an uncanny match between the contours on Earth and the Martian face, as if the face on Mars, FOM, was modeled after the erosional irregularities of the face on Earth, or FOE. Why is there such an interesting similarity? As if they were more recently been modified in order to match one with the other. But you also need to look at the Wallkill River. It travels through a gouge or gorge where the mouth would be. Why does the river flow through a gorge at the mouth? Rivers don't flow upstream, don't flow uphill. And so how could you possibly have gotten the river to cross the mouth? And I did my research, and I found out that back in the early 1800s, the whole part of the Wallkill River Valley to the left of the face was occupied by a shallow lake. And the face was provided the dam for that lake. Next slide, please. And here you can see the lake called Drowned Lands to the south of the face in the upper part of the diagram. And in order to drown those lands, they had to lower the spillway for the lake, which was just above the top of the face, up on elevated, and that is what caused the Walker River to back up. And you have a channel that was carved through the mouth. You can see in the bottom image, lower right, and it's called the Chi-Chunk Canal. That was dug in the late 1800s in order to drain all of that lake, and so that you could get fertile farmlands as a consequence. And the area where that lake existed is now very fertile onion farming land. A lot of onions are grown in that area. Next slide, please. Well, having found the face, I wanted to know if the DNM Pyramid, the most obvious monument on Mars, could have existed on Earth. And I looked around and realizing that with all of the mountains and hills that we have in the valley and surrounding the valley, there could only be one place where it would have fit. And I found it where you could see here that this is the largest area not occupied by hills and mountains where the DNM could have fit. And when you outline it there, you find that it's oriented in the exact same relationship to the other features that I had found as the DNM is to the other features on Mars. Next slide, please. Again, going back to the size of this is an enormous pyramid. Based on its Earth footprint, the DNM pyramid on Mars is slightly over 1,000 feet in height and has a footprint of approximately 3.5 square miles. The length of the sides on the left and right may be extended because of the photographic angle of the Martian images of Sidonia. So it may be not quite as long and quite as large as a 3.5 square mile footprint, but it may be closer just to 3 square miles. Next slide. But unusually, below this area, there are two mountains that represent these granitic intrusions that have been eroded because of the tilt of the bedrock and are now exposed as Mount Adam and Mount Eve. And I was quick to realize that Mount Eve is carved, or seems to have been carved in the shape of a key. And right next to it, there is a four-sided pyramid called Mount Adam. And I put on the left side of this diagram crop circles that occurred at the same time in England, 1992, as I was finding this stuff. And there, the one in the upper left diagram is of a key, almost exact same shape. And in the lower left is a crop circle called the Curly Man, showing Fibonacci spirals. And that's what I found as trace elements in the surrounding bedrock of a possible figure, Fibonacci figure that had existed there before. But the important thing is to note the key and the pyramid, Mount Adam and Mount Eve. Next slide, please. Looking from Mount Austin, and this would be to the northeast, from there I took this picture, and you can see Mount Eve on the left and Mount Adam on the right. And together they seem to form the shape of a pregnant woman with her breast. And then if in the foreground, you have the face located with a located by a water tank on the top of it. That's pretty amazing. A beheaded pregnant woman in the valley. I wonder if that has any significance. But these features are there as part of the total picture of what happened long time ago. Somebody wanted these mountains to resemble this feature. Next slide, please. If you look at Mount Adam, what I discovered was that you have the tree rows going up the north side, all in rows, as in steps up the side of the mountain. And if you go around to the right side, next slide, please, you can see that where the glacier has come across and scraped away some of the rock to show that the underlying features underneath of Mount Adam, the southwest side, next slide, please. Note possible traces of steps preserved near the top of the mountain and along the lower bench arrows, and the non-horizontal structure of the granite. Unlike the north side, which was to the left, which received the brunt of impact from ice sheets, steps on the southwest side may have survived by being downflow and in the ice shadow. Less chemical weathering and water runoff at the top of the mountain may explain why those steps are preserved better on the left side than the ones lower down on the slope here in the front of you. This picture was taken in 1994. Next slide, please. When you superimpose the objects that were recognized by Hoagland and his team from Mars on Earth, you can see a lot of different features surrounding this area. The DNM Pyramid occurs to the right, and the Mount Adam and Mount Eve occur below this image. But one of the things that stands out is a feature in the center called Pine Island. Now, when you had drowned lakes in the valley, there are some features, geographic features that's poked up above the level of the lake, and they were named islands. Here you have Pine Island, and to the north you have Black Walnut Island, and then there's other islands there with other names. And when the lake was drained, those locations retained their names from when they were flooded. And you can see in the center this six-sided pyramid laid out, and I superimposed the one on Mars, and the Pine Island almost perfectly matches in its terms of extent to the base of a pyramid that may have existed there. Imagine, you could drive to Pine Island and be standing on an ancient pyramid base. Next slide, please. Age of the Sidonia II complex on Earth. Now we're getting into some very interesting calculations. Which came first, Sidonia I or Sidonia II? Sidonia II is on Earth. Sidonia I is on Mars. The oldest estimate of 500,000 years for Sidonia I is based on the solstice alignment of the face, cliff, crater with the sun on Mars. This comes from Hoagland, 1992, in his Monuments of Mars. That age occurred during the Earth's Great Interglacial, prior to the growth of the Illinoisan ice sheet 200,000 years ago. That penultimate glacial period, approximately 140,000 years to 200,000 years ago, would have destroyed all of the traces of the crater, cliff, and face in the valley. A younger age, such as during the previous Sangamonian interglacial, from 115,000 to 140,000 years ago, would have subjected the monuments in the Wallkill River Valley to only one interval of cyclic burial under ice, and could account for the survival of features which retained significant bedrock expression after the ice disappeared. Next slide, please.
Hold on one second, Bruce. I'd like to take a short break here for two reasons. First of all, I want to kind of capture any questions that the folks may have. Also, I want to remind everybody in the audience, please use the chat capability. If you have any questions that you want queued up, Bruce Pearson is monitoring that. Also, be prepared if you want. You can use the raise hand symbol on Zoom. Now, let's go through here. I think this is a good break point. Nick, do you have any comment or quick question that Bruce might be able to field?
Just one quick one. This is a little bit before, but when I see NASA, who they take erasers and they erase parts of what they're photographing, and I always so am infuriated that they're being dealt with. We're being dealt with. We're being barred from the reality of the photographs. And just, do you have any comments on that?
Just that I've heard confirmations from whistleblowers that yes, they did airbrush out any anomalous objects that they felt could be interpreted as artificial or as UFOs. Correct.
Right, and is that, where does that direction come from? Do you have any idea of why that's going on?
I think it comes from the fact that the government has wanted to keep Americans in the dark about alien presence, largely because if they admit too much, they don't want to share the knowledge that they have with our enemies of Russia and China. But now it's gotten to the point where it's clear that Russia and China, through spying, have already acquired all of that knowledge anyway. So now you're getting the Navy to relax their restrictions and give us some confirmation that, yes, unidentified flying objects are real. They do exist. They're in there flying around in our atmosphere. And there's a lot more to it, though, a lot more, because it involves who these beings are, why they're here, how long they've been here. And what I'm showing here with my work is that our civilizations go back much further than anybody could ever have imagined. And you almost have to ask the reason why are Egyptologists so restricted in their thinking? So they can't recognize that the Giza pyramid is much older than a human civilization as previously recognized. And because it means that we don't have the answers. And that maybe there are technologies existing older than the Holocene interglacial that somebody had, somebody was using, and who were they? And they didn't want this idea of extraterrestrial to become proven.
Right. Well, one last question is, have you brought this research, which is phenomenal, to the History Channel to see if they could do a program or programs about your findings?
Okay. Could you repeat that?
I'm just suggesting that I believe that this is absolutely something that should be, like Peter was saying, given a much wider audience, and perhaps the History Channel would produce a program or programs about your research.
I would love to have that. And you know, they have pretty much chosen all their talking heads for their shows. And I've talked to some of the people who appear on those shows, and they said, yes, you should be on those shows, but it's up to the producers of what they want.
Well, if you need any letters, I think this group right now would be happy to write letters to the right people there to say it's time that this research be revealed.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because this is supporting the research of a lot of other people, not just Richard Hoagland, but also Grant Hancock, Andrew Collins, and Mark Carlotto, and many others who are pushing the age of intelligent structures and civilizations and monuments way back, now as much as 50,000 years.
It's an extraordinary dynamic that's going on right now, and I'm just so impressed with your research and the others and how you've connected the dots. You have connected the dots. You're an amazing researcher. Okay, that's what
Thank
I have.
you.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I've been ignored for decades.
Okay.
That's got to
Bruce,
change. That has got to change, Bruce. Really has.
okay, we'll go
Thank you.
right down my list here. Peter, you're next, then Bruce Pearson.
Yeah, again, thank you, Bruce. One quick observation, two quick questions. I think it was also in the early 90s, around the time I first met Richard and heard him speak at the United Nations before conferences, talking about the same representation of Sidonia in Wiltshire, England, which,
Right.
from what you've said and what I remember, was considerably more accurate, point to point to point, in the Wiltshire area. This was pretty much still analog time. We were doing things a lot more with, paper and not, on computers much. But one thing that Richard produced that I found fascinating was an acetate, piece of clear plastic with everything compressed in size, because the Wiltshire representation is considerably smaller, obviously, than the one on Mars, but that you could lay over the map of Sidonia, and it just made my jaw drop. I'm sure I have it somewhere in files, but I'm sure you remember that. The other thing,
Yes.
in your research, going back to colonial times or whenever, have you been able to determine who actually named the Osiris area Osiris? It wasn't the Egyptians, but do you have any idea how that region of New York State got that name?
Well, we do know that the United States was referred to in the colonial days as the New Egypt, and by the Masons. And there is a very strong Masonic presence in that area of New York. Very strong. In Walden, the town just south of Lake Osiris, there's a lodge, a Masonic lodge. That's just a suspicion.
Yeah. My other question was, hold on one second. Yes, having visited the Pine Bush area since before, I was really obsessed originally with the subject of UFOs first in the 70s, and having been part of the yearly growing conference festivals there, and having known Ellen Crystal, rest her soul, and a lot of the original researchers on location in the area. Of course, at a certain point, deductive reasoning, common sense, critical thinking leaves you with not a lot else to account for the extraordinarily high percentage of sightings, events, paranormal activity in the area, other than that it is a kind of window area or vortex or what have you. You are specifically saying that you feel or are convinced that it is an area with underground non-human intelligent spaces, which doesn't surprise me. I'm just wondering, do you have any, empirical evidence that you present or that you can share with us to back that up, other than, a logical conclusion?
Well, other than having photographs showing the ships just descending through forest trees into the ground and disappearing, and Ellen Crystal, in her book Silent Invasion, recorded one time when she was out in one of the fields, local fields around that center of the hotspot, suddenly a huge tunnel opened up in the ground. It just manifested it, and she felt warm air coming out of it. And when they recognized she was seeing this, it immediately closed. And we know from the friends in Italy who were ETs making friends with a group of humans, that where they shared their information, they had technology that they could beam down into the earth and expand a cavity within the earth, compressing the rock around them to form the walls of an underground chamber or base. And that they could also do this to create the tunnels that exited that chamber so that they could fly their ships in and out of it. And my guess is that the ships are not really passing through the trees and rocks per se, but there is something that's happening in the ground and the air above the ground that is causing the matter to part so that they can get into their underground base. Now, what other empirical evidence? Probably the most significant that I found was with a friend that I made who called me up and told me that there was that he lived in near Millbrook or Saw Point, New York, west of Poughkeepsie, and that that he was seeing all the types of ships I was seeing, and he invited me to come out there. Make a long story short, I went there, and that night I witnessed the manta ray put on a performance for us, which is on my websites. And he told me about seeing trucks, large trucks carrying materials, even 18-wheelers, driving down this one country road, very, poorly paved, that had a gate at the front, and it disappeared into a valley, the stream valley. And what are all these trucks going down this road and disappearing? And then he said, on the field across my parents' house, it was a horse farm. He saw one day a hatch opening up and a man climbing out and then closing the hatch and walking away. So that he said he thinks this is run by the government. Well, run by the government? If these ships are being flown by the government, or maybe they're working with the aliens. Maybe there's an alliance going on. And
yeah, here you're getting, for me, this is where we fall into the trap of conspiratorial thinking and maybe, and if enough of us say maybe, then we assume that it's real.
Right.
That hatch could have been to some kind of actually conventional but extraordinary structure that was set up as a storm area with no amazing complications attached.
Oh, of course. It would have to be viewed from many different ways to rule out different explanations. But we witnessed the manta ray rise up right above this.
That's fascinating, and you've answered my question. I thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Bruce Pearson, I got a question for you.
Go
what
ahead.
about Egyptian names and being tied perhaps to the Masons?
Well, in an effort of full disclosure, I must advise everyone I'm a master mason, and
oh no.
and if I'd love to answer that, Joe, but then I'd be forced to find all of you and kill you. So I really don't really choose to do that right now. So that being said, I'm not going to say anymore because maybe I'll be the one that gets wiped out. But in all seriousness, Mindy's been patient waiting. She had a question, if I might forward it to you, Bruce. Where do you think the water on Mars went? And I think that's a very important question because we do have vestiges now. Finally, NASA's kind of opening up slowly. Talk about a disclosure. We now see obvious evidence of the ice caps. There are pictures from ground level on Mars showing the light clouds in the remaining atmosphere. And now they're even talking about seeing some green through the seasonal growth of some type of algae or some other living form. So
right, and there's also now more evidence that there may be a higher oxygen content than people would realize too.
So Mindy, yeah. So it was either blown off or whether it was cataclysmic due to nuclear explosion or some type of explosion is open for debate, I think, if I may. Correct me
Yes.
if I'm wrong, gentlemen. But clearly the bulk of the atmosphere has dissipated, but the remaining atmosphere and or the subterranean retention of water, or even on the surface, as is exhibited at the ice caps through the seasonal flow of the planet around the sun, there is definitely some water there. And so.
Oh, yes, I agree. Can we get back to the slide show,
Yes, sir.
Joe?
Of course.
Yes,
Because I,
absolutely. I was going to
because you have
suggest
10
that
minutes
anyway.
here. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Age of the Sidonia II complex on Earth. Even so, there has been an extreme amount of erosion, and post-glacial age, post-dating the Younger Dryas, which ended about 10,000 years ago, is not long enough to account for the reduction and near leveling of large pyramidal structures, which may have been constructed of stone like the Pyramid of Egypt. The D&M Pyramid, the largest of all pyramids in the Sidonia I complex, would have been toppled and destroyed by the movement of massive ice sheets up to maybe 1 to 2 miles thick. Although much of its base could have survived, indications of the outline of the pyramid base have indeed survived. An age of 200,000 years, which is what Hoagland now thinks is the age of Sidonia I, that's the Sidonia on Mars, Personal Communications in 1994, places the complex of the beginning of the Illinois glacial episode and it places the complex at the beginning of the Illinois glacial episode and is, again, too old for reasons cited above. A Sangamonian or Eemian interglacial age, therefore, is indicated. Next slide, please. Here we show the comparison between the Sidonia on Earth and the Sidonia on Mars. And you can see that they are covering approximately the same geographic area. They are, but they are oriented slightly different. If you look at the center of the crater at 41 degrees 36 minutes and rotate the one on Mars, it is located in a different angle than the one on Earth. And this could conceivably be due to where to place it and how to place it. If you want to make the one on Mars come first, then you're going to have to explain how they were able to find a valley at the same latitude that matches everything that you see in the picture on the left. Next slide, please. When you look at this angle of rotation, you have approximately 36 degrees, an interesting number. Don't know if that's significant, but you can see that the one on Earth, which is shown here, is oriented a little bit differently than the one on Mars. Next slide, please. Why the difference? Local geology forced the placement, and the difference is meaningless. Longitude is arbitrary, while latitude is fixed. The angle difference could be due to the tilt angle of Earth and Mars at the time they were constructed. Is this angle, 36 degrees, the sum of Earth and Mars tilt angles, or is it the difference between tilt angles? Maximum tilt for Mars is 40 degrees, while that for Earth is 25 degrees. Minimum tilt for Mars is 13 degrees, while the minimum for Earth is 22.5 degrees. 13 plus 22.5 yields 35.6 degrees, close to the divergence angle. The tilt angle varies according to obliquity, 40,000 years on Earth. The tilt angle varies over 10 to 20 million years for Mars. When was the last time the tilt on Mars was only 13 degrees? That's an interesting question. Next slide, please. The center of the crater is not at exactly the same latitude on Mars and Earth. They were rounded off to 41 degrees 36 minutes. Mars is tectonically dead. If it ever had tectonic plates, they have long since stopped moving as the core of the planet cooled. Earth, on the other hand, is dynamically changing. Therefore, the location of crater 2 would be changing longitude and latitude as the North American plate moved west and rotated counterclockwise. The slight difference in latitude would represent the amount of movement since the Sidonia 1 complex was created on Mars. Next slide, please. That difference is, you can see here, 33,888 feet or 118,506 centimeters between where the Earth latitude of center of the crater is at the top and the Mars center of the crater is at the bottom. Next slide, please. North-south movement along the San Andreas Fault on the west coast is estimated at about 5 centimeters per year. In other words, 3 centimeters for the Pacific Plate and Western California, 2 centimeters for Eastern California and the South. However, today, the North American plate is moving westward at about 2 centimeters per year. A series of supervolcanic calderas in the northwest United States show the motion of the North American plate over a stationary hotspot, the Yellowstone hotspot, during the last 16.3 million years. These data show an average southwest movement of 3.64 centimeters per year, or 317 miles in 14 million years. Next slide, please. That means that the North American plate is rotating counterclockwise, and the East Coast is moving slowly north as it moves west. The North Atlantic Ocean is the last part of the Atlantic Ocean basin to open, and the rate of spreading is faster than in the Central Atlantic. The amount of northward movement would be no more than the amount of southward movement of the West Coast at 2.03 centimeters per year. That's because of the circular counterclockwise rotation. And it could also be as little as 1 centimeter per year for northward movement. What do these spreading rates give us for age? Next slide, please. Here we see the diagram produced by the USGS of the calderas where the Yellowstone hotspot had been underneath the continental American plate as it moved southwest, and giving you your rates of motion over the 14 million years. Very interesting name. Of course, Yellowstone is in the upper right corner of the triangle. Next slide, please. Just a reminder that we have 4 stages recognized of ice ages in North America: the Wisconsinian, the Illinoisan, the Kansan, and the Nebraskan. And between the Illinoisan and Wisconsin, we have the Sangamonian interglacial. And between the Wisconsin and today, we have the Holocene interglacial. We're in about the middle of our interglacial now. And I sort of have to smile when people say, oh, we're approaching another ice age. Excuse me, but the Sangamonian lasted 21,000 years, and we're only 11,000 years into our Holocene. So you got another 10,000 years to wait. Next slide, please. Calculating the age of Sidonia 1 on Mars. Sidonia Complex on Mars may have been created when a dying civilization saw that its monuments on Earth were going to be destroyed by an upcoming glacial age. They decided to build a near duplicate of the Wallkill River Valley monuments on a planet that would be visited after the survivors on Earth reached spacefaring technology again. Isn't this what happened? This duplicate would survive and become a template for discovering the remnants of the original complex on Earth at that same latitude. For any civilization to do this places a high level of importance to that race on the meaning for that complex of monuments. I mean, how much do we as humans value and our monuments that we build all around the world commemorating various events? One has to also ask, what in the world is the face doing on Earth? Next slide, please. At the time the Sidonia Complex on Mars was created, both the Sidonia 1 and 2 craters were located at the very same latitude. Since then, Sidonia 2 on Earth has moved north by 3,888 feet, or 118,506 centimeters. Minimum If the rate of movement north was an average 2 centimeters per year, the age of Sidonia 1 on Mars would be 59,253 years old, in the middle of the last glacial advance. Maximum, if the rate of movement north was only half that rate, or 1 centimeter per year, the age of the Sidonia 1 on Mars would be 118,506 years, just before the end of the Sangomonian interglacial and the beginning of the Wisconsinian glacial age, the glacial period. Next slide, please. Mark Colato wrote a book, Before Atlantis, in 2018, published, and he was locating the direction of all the bases of the major ancient monuments, the oldest monuments on Earth, and trying to find out where they were pointing. He felt that they were pointing towards magnetic poles of the past. And in this diagram, you can see where the solar axis of the Earth is, the orbital axis today, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate locations where the magnetic pole may have been located in the past. And he based a lot of his research on Hapgood, who talks about these ancient magnetic poles. Next slide, please. Carlotto generated this map for his book, in which he shows where we are today on the left, 0 at the bottom, and where the Illinoisan Ice Age began at 140,000 years ago and ended at 180,000 years ago, or began at 180,000 and ended at 140,000. And he puts in there different periods of time relative to each of the magnetic poles and how they changed. He has the Hudson Bay pole, the Norwegian Sea pole, the Greenland pole, and the Bering Sea pole. So with these 4 magnetic poles, he correlates all of the different ancient civilizations, the basis upon which later civilizations built their monuments and structures on top of. And these orientations can be sequenced through the last ice age. The only difference I have between his diagram and my understanding of geology is that the Wisconsin glacial period that he shows in purple actually went all the way across the yellow and the green bands up to the beginning of the Eemian interglacial, or the end of it. So he does not consider the first half of the Wisconsin Ice Age to have been a true ice age. And he shows the sea level variations at the top of his diagram, which may be very well true. But what I find is that when you plot the Sidonia age on it based on my 2 measurements of 1 centimeter versus 2 centimeters continental drift, you find out that they are perfectly bracket the end of the Eemian, right in the middle of the Greenland ice magnetic pole, and the beginning of the Wisconsin magnetic pole at around 60,000 years ago. So there seems to be some general correlation of where these ancient civilizations that predate Göbekli Tepe, where they fit into the chronological sequence, not the actual age, but the chronological sequence, going back as much as over 60,000 years. That's, I find to be amazing, that he's essentially confirmed that there could have been intelligent civilization on Earth during the Eemian interglacial. Next slide, please. When looking at the diagram of this ice age, and keep in mind that this diagram is reversed from his, he has a 0 point on the left, while I have it on the right, so it's inverse. The one I put this diagram in, I wanted to emphasize the pink bar in the middle of the last interglacial, where the Earth's temperatures, global temperatures, reached 3 to 5 degrees centigrade hotter than today for about 3,000 years. Now that's over, 40 degrees Fahrenheit hotter during the summer. Think about it. You think living in Phoenix is hot. It was a lot hotter back then. Good problem. Can we survive in that type of heat? And yet, Dr. Suzanne Martinez wrote the book, The Lost History of the Little People, and in it she shows that that there are a lot of myths that she collected of ancient civilizations, saying that after man was created, that man had to live underground. And she said that the temperatures on Earth decreased, and when they decreased, the man could come up above ground. And could this help explain why we have so many discovered chambers underground in Turkey and the Middle East and in China, where somebody was clearly living at one time? Could these have been made that far back in time? Okay, next slide, please. And we see that hominid evolution is very, short in comparison to all the other hominids that have been now recognized, and there are even more now since then. The Deniscian and not been shown, etc. And Neanderthal is not shown on this map. Next slide, please. It is highly unlikely that 6 features spread out over an area of 250 square miles could exist on 2 very different planets and at the same latitude position in the northern hemisphere by chance alone. The existence of these 2 complexes resolves the debate as to the artificial origin of the face on Mars. The Sidonia Complex on Mars was probably created as a template, allowing us to recognize the original structure on Earth after they had been severely damaged by glaciation and erosion. And that is indeed how I'll use the Sidonia Complex on Mars to recognize those remnant features on Earth. Plate tectonic motion dates the building of Sidonia 1 on Mars no younger than 59,000 years, and Sidonia 2 on Earth sometimes during the previous interglacial, 115,000 to 140,000 years ago. Pretty amazing. Next slide, please. Conclusion, 2 of 4. One of several possible explanations. The Sidonia Complex on Earth indicates the existence of a pre-Sumerian culture or race in North America during the previous interglacial period, soon after Homo sapiens sapiens evolved from Homo sapiens, Cro-Magnon man. This culture differed from later known cultures by carving monuments in bedrock, answering one of the listeners' questions about why they made pyramids more than 4-sided, as well as building 5- and 6-sided pyramids. That is very interesting. That is typical of this older period, not of the younger period where our history as allegedly began. Another possible explanation: the Sidonia complexes were not created by humans or human ancestors. They are created by extraterrestrial visitors who wanted to leave proof that they were involved in our evolution. We were created in their image. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for listening to my lecture. And if you're interested in learning more about my research in the Wallkill River Valley, purchase a copy of Unconventional Aerial Phenomena in the Hudson and Wallkill River Valley of New York. This is available on Amazon.com. And I think you'll be very pleased. It includes all of my research over an 11-year period from 1992 to 2003. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Okay. Okay, thank you, Bruce. Yes, I agree. Now we'll open it up. We have about 25 minutes. So Bruce Pearson, do we have any hands up or anybody in the queue?
I just
would
have
like to.
I've got to jump, but thank you again, Bruce. Absolutely fascinating afternoon, and be well, everybody. Stay well as we move into this next week of this very strange new year.
Okay.
Yes,
Same to
very
you,
true.
Peter.
Peter, thank you so much. Thanks
You
for
bet,
joining.
Thank you.
Okay, let me start out. I do have a couple of comments. What seems to be missing from all the equations are certain key variables that I don't hear people doing a lot of talking about. One is our good old sun, which has its own frequency of changes that has been going on over millennia itself. Has obviously a direct impact on our lives on Earth, but not only that, but all the planets of the solar system. For instance, we just came out of an 11-year cycle, quiet cycle they call it, and we're now going into what is known as our active cycle. So we're going to be seeing more sunspot activity, coronal mass ejections, and all that goes with that. Now, astrophysicists have come up with some very interesting ideas that obviously can be borne out pretty much. One of them is that the solar radiation that the sun puts out has a direct bearing on what affects the Earth and the other planets in the form of cosmic radiation. Solar radiation is different, and according to certain astrophysicists, it provides a protective sphere of influence that helps block out a lot of the cosmic radiation that is of a lighter mass, but it can also go through the Earth and other objects. Briefly speaking, is that impact causes a heating of the Earth itself, the core specifically, which affects tectonic plate movement, also volcanism, and so on. Now, there was a fear that we were actually going into a longer cycle, a 200-year cycle, I believe is what they were talking about. And the last time we had that 200-year cycle, the Earth had a mini ice age. In 1815, we had a blizzard in New York City. So it wasn't because of the cosmic radiation directly, other than the fact that a major volcano exploded, causing a cosmic winter. Now, the whole point of this statement is that since the sun is the variable that's causing a lot of this, or can be causing a lot of this, we also have another impact, and that impact is that, yeah, it's interesting about the magnetic pole shifting again. It's shifted in the past, as we know, but of greater concern is the actual movement of the Earth's rotational pole. And that apparently has changed in the past, causing ice sheets and loss of civilizations even, perhaps. Bruce, have you seen anything along that line in the research that you've been doing?
Yes, very much so. And it's unfortunate that I have nothing against astronomers, but they tend not to want to listen to anybody who's not educated as an astronomer about something that's happening off planet. And I worked with Columbia University with Dr. Paul Olson and Dr. Dennis Kent from 1988 to 1993. And we, for over a 3-year period, we cored 28,000 feet of rock in the Newark Basin, 7 different wells, in order to extract all of the climate changes in the lake cycle fluctuations in the Newark Basin that happened over 200 million years ago. And what we discovered in that it's been astounding that we have generated. Pardon?
Go ahead.
This is Newark Basin in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and I was the well site geologist who had to describe and photograph all 28,000 feet of that. And so I took voluminous field notes, etc., and we converted that into climate cycles based on Fourier analysis. And there are 4 major cycles, one around 20,000 years, and another around 100,000 years, 5 times the 20,000, and another at 430,000 years, which is the next cycle up, et cetera. And there was even a 2.2, 2.5, 2.8 million year cycle that we were able to detect. And they are all nested within one another. Nested. You know what I mean by nested? Like it takes four of the smallest cycles, which we labeled the precession cycle, five of them to make one eccentricity cycle, the next cycle up. So, and then it takes four of them to make the second eccentricity cycle. So they are all like Russian dolls, one inside the other. And these cycles, but once you get to the Ice Age, everything changes, radically changes. Today, the first and second cycles, the smallest and the next longest, alternate with one another. And the second cycle is not composed of small precession cycles. It is composed of cycles that are only, they're about 5,000 years apiece, 5,140 years apiece. So part of the precession equinox. And this is a radical change because it's during the first cycle that we have interglacials, and the second cycle, which alternates with it, that we have ice ages. And this is nobody seems to have recognized this in the paleoclimate climate group, and how it happened. And I developed a theory that I'd wanted to express is to explain this, but it's going to, make astronomers pull their hair out, I swear, because it's not going to go along with many of their ideas. At any rate, that's it. I do have a way of explaining all of that and the changing orientation. And by the way, Joe, all of the magnetic pole reversals were documented very carefully through that 28,000 feet of core. Right. And we were able to show that the transition when the Earth magnetic pole flip could be as little as a few hundred years to as much as 1,000 years to take place.
Okay, interesting. Okay, let's see. I think Bambi, did you have a question? Bambi, I see you're out there. Are you on mute? Okay.
I'd like to help Bruce get onto mainstream media.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yep, I'm a publicity person, so I'll give it a shot and I'll get back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Coming at an exciting time, I'm glad I'll be able to be involved here in my home.
Okay.
It's safer.
Right. Nick, do you have anything?
I'm just really excited and very curious, and I'm sure my group, Disclosure Network New York, is very excited and wants to know a lot more about what's going on right now in that area, the reported phenomenon that's going on, and what the townspeople around there have seen and heard. I would just be amazingly interested in that, and I want to follow up at some point with Bruce about that.
Thank you. You do realize, of course, every time I think of this area of where these monuments once existed, that New York is called the Empire State. And that may not just be a coincidence.
Wow.
That we had such activity happening right in New York City's backyard.
Exactly, and we're so close to that, and we need to do much more research too. I'd love to be in touch with you, and please, I want to invite you on my podcast in a month or two. I'll get to you about what dates and times we'll see if we can put together.
Thank you. I would very much enjoy that.
Sounds like a plan. Okay. Mindy, are you out there?
I'm sorry, I had myself on mute. Hi, everybody. Wonderful presentation. Hi, a wonderful presentation, Bruce. I've followed your work for many, many years. Unbelievable amount of research and so thorough. And I was hoping you could maybe talk a little bit about the stone chambers of upstate New York and New England.
Absolutely. I love the stone chambers. I went with Phil and Brogno on a field trip back in 1992. And I even have a website on it, what we found. And I took my proton magnetometer with me. And I found that at the center, the entrance to each of those stone chambers, there is a magnetic anomaly, a very strong one, that can actually reverse the Earth's magnetic poles locally, right there in front of the doorways. And I don't know what it has to be some sort of a magnetite or emery or some magnetic feature that was planted below the ground at the entrance. But it is very strong magnetic. And the only thing I could think of is that this was used in the past for people to locate these chambers.
Okay. All right, Stanley Nizamek, I see you're out there. Would you like to make a comment or ask a question? You are on mute though.
Hi,
Hey,
just a
Stan.
quick thing in case you're still around. Bruce, what video do you have that could capsulate this presentation? Like 20 minutes.
What city?
What video that you could
encapsulate? Yeah. I have
encapsulate
3 videos out there already on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. You just have to go to Bruce Cornet, on my YouTube channel, and you'll find them.
Perfect.
On the same subject.
You don't mind going on Facebook, do you? Because there are a lot of MUFON groups and a lot of contacts that we've developed over years, and just to awaken some folks. Sounds like might as well get a change of let's say a change of thoughts, and yours is one of them that should be right up top.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to have other people on Facebook sponsor me. You know what I mean? Do that. And right now, I'm not very much interested in having my own Facebook profile. Okay.
That's okay.
All right. Very good.
Okay. Well, we have Sophia Agrias. Would you like to make a comment?
I thought the presentation, Bruce, was absolutely spectacular. And I live down the coast in central New Jersey, down by Barnegat Bay, and I've seen an incredible amount of activity down there over the last 20 years that I've been down there.
You're talking about UAP activity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I had no idea about your Wallkill River Valley research. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. What about Susan Rogers? Susan, I see you're out there.
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Bruce, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Really incredible. I just like to say that maybe when this great tribulation is over, would you be interested in organizing a field trip for those of us?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, yes. I have led a number of field trips, even from an Indian, from India. I mean, a religious faction that came over, and I gave them a tour back in August of 2003. So yes,
so it's a possibility for the future.
Yes, it is a possibility. It would require travel, and because I live in El Paso, Texas. So.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I haven't been back there since 2007. So I've not been there for 13 years.
I see. Okay.
Bruce, I'm ready for the Mars trip. So when you get that together, please.
Well, we need a spaceship.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure you can do it. I mean, if you've come up with this research, I'm sure you can get us a spaceship.
Right. Yeah. We'll have to do a Stephen Greer get together and ask our visitors if they could spare one of their shuttle vehicles.
Sounds good to me.
I think it could be possible too.
Okay, let's see. Who haven't we heard? Kathy, are you out there?
Yes, so it was a wonderful presentation. There's so many places on Earth. I think of Sedona, Arizona, that's so very active also. Magnetic areas and a lot of interesting activity going on there too. A wonderful presentation.
Also, how many of you have heard of Wanacue vortex?
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of I've been there and studied that with the people who are experts on it, and it really exists. And there are vortexes all over it. I mean, you just have to mention Skinwalker, and everybody will realize, okay, there's something going on there too.
Yep. Okay, Stanley, find your microphone.
Got it. Thank you. I do have a few ties to the History Channel, so I'll see if I can do some help for you over there.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Thank you, Stan. Okay, Bruce Pearson. Haven't heard from you in a while.
Well, that's pretty unusual, isn't it, Joe?
Yep.
That's
say that.
I've been being a good boy. I've been a good boy today. Fantastic amount of information, well corroborated, well documented, Bruce. It's kind of tough to absorb it all. I'm going to go back and review the program and try to get a better detailed picture and understand it. But that being said, yeah, this is definitely overdue for a documentary or a program in depth. So I would just, I have a good friend who's been an editor down at Discovery for 20 years, done a lot of the big shows, and I'll reach out to him and see if I can make some connections for you also. But
thank you.
This has been another amazing program as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's
well, I find it encouraging that so many other people are pushing the boundary of advanced human civilization back further and further, and that we're getting past the fear factor that, oh my goodness, I mean, our past civilization collapsed and we went back to hunting and gathering for thousands of years, and now we're coming back. I mean, people are afraid of this because what it implies is that it can happen again.
Absolutely. And, Michael Cremo says the toilet gets flushed every 600,000 years or so. And I don't think that it's any harder now to refute that than it was in the past before this documentation and this evidence, such as yours, as well as many other disparate pieces of information, has come forward. So I think there's a compelling case that, yes, this isn't as they say, this isn't our first rodeo. So great presentation. I thank you for it. And I thank all our guests for it.
And thank you. Go to those other researchers with their URLs, and especially Robert Harbour. He's doing a fantastic job and finding all sorts of amazing things that are coming out now. And it's sad, the question of, tampering by NASA to cover up these anomalies. He's recognized them, and they've found a way of recognizing those areas that have been modified on their rover images, and they can get in there and remove the cover, the alteration. They can straighten it out and find out what was being hidden underneath, which is interesting. Why even bother? I mean.
Well, I can add perhaps a little bit of very arm's length. When I was with RCA Americom, we were building this STS video program. So I interfaced for 3 years with NASA on almost a daily basis. And I came to realize the mindset, very protective, very insular, very controlled environment, that almost a paranoid environment that I had noticed when we were building the video systems for the space shuttle for the broadcast feeds. That kind of, and of course it came out through in the press conference at the National Press Club. The disclosure lady was airbrushing stuff out as a contractor with Motorola and so on. I think it is a control issue. I think it's, you go back to the Rand Corporation's report that said that, society would go running and screaming naked into the streets if they ever found out there were other, and it's also a turf protection from the higher ed and educational infrastructure that, if it's not my way, it's no way. And, the bias against archaeological evidence that doesn't follow the corporate paradigm, if you will. So I think all these things, obviously the Air Force is going to be the first one to say, well, there's stuff coming in and out of here that we can't even go near touching. So I guess we can't protect you. That kind of punches a hole in the $900 billion defense budget to some extent. So I think there's a lot of reasons, good or not good, that explain why this information has, at the very least, not been investigated, and I think more appropriately in the description has been suppressed, as you know better than I, perhaps. But it's getting harder and harder to refute high def camera images off a cell phone when they're in HD, and when pilots and professionals in my background in doing aviation documentaries come forth, and they are credible and they aren't looking for notoriety. In fact, they run the other way from it. So it's getting harder and harder to keep the elephant under the tent. So I think that's a good thing.
Me too. As a paleontologist whose interest is in the history of life on Earth, I think ancient human history is perhaps at the top of our list of things that we need to know more about.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And with that, the half hour is approaching. And I'd like to thank Bruce for an excellent presentation. Very interesting. I think there's a lot more that we'd like to learn about it. And perhaps we can schedule another get together with a follow-on with some of the new stuff that you come up with. Everybody else, thank you all for being here. It is appreciated. Thank you for being a lively audience with a lot of good questions and a lot of good comments. And
thank you, Joe and Bruce. Thank you, Joe and Bruce, for all of your efforts in putting this together and making this possible. This is really amazing. Thank you.
Well,
pleasure's been ours, really.
Okay, we will be meeting on the second Saturday of February. I believe Bruce Pearson is going to be our featured guest.
Ooh.
So he's going from.
Oh, wow.
So you might want to schedule a root canal that day or something to get it out of the way.
But anyway, thanks again, everybody, and have a great day. Have a great week, and good luck with what's going on.
Yeah, try to keep your head screwed on straight and hang in there. Be safe, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for
investing your time. Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.